catalyst for development. Okay, so back in 1993, my colleague Franco Bianchini also was saying cultural planning is a culturally sensitive approach to local development. So he was moving a little bit further out in terms of what Colin Mercer had said, and he was saying, yeah, we need to look at the big picture of a place, we need to look at the history, we need to look at the geography, the landscape of a place, we need to look at the economic dynamics, etc. So we need to take a culturally sensitive approach to development. Now, in Canada, for example, we have examples of fantastic cultural plans. If you look at Toronto, what they did starting in 2003, they completely mobilized the creative industries and culture and transformed the distillery district, for example, into a work-live space. Now, they are all thinking that culture is one thing, but that we all need to mobilize other aspects of local development. The Canadians in particular, they are saying cultural planning is a whole system approach where you need involvement of local stakeholders. But when we talk about involvement of local stakeholders, we don't mean involvement of stakeholders at the end of a process or a policy. We mean at the beginning. So this is like a little change in perspective here. What the Canadians mean by this is the city has to drive this process of consulting, understanding their resources, etc., and then together with their people, across departments, they need to deliver projects and they need to deliver policies. So it's more like a bottom-up approach, whereby so far we have seen a top-down approach. Okay, so that's the big thing. In my view, cultural planning derives from Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs was an American urbanist, if you want, and back in the 60s she was saying cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because, she was saying, only because and only when they are created by everybody. Now, this is a complete kind of bottom-up, if you want. Now, that's my starting point. So, in my definition of cultural planning, I would say, to me, if you want to do a cultural plan or a cultural regeneration or something, it has to be a people-centered approach. So the first thing you put to the table is, what are our people in this city doing? What are their visions for this place? What are they telling us about how this place should transform and change, etc.? So this approach requires a deep understanding of the local cultural ecology, and also an understanding of what I call community assets. It means the skills of the people there. It means the cultural institutions. What kind of cultural institutions do we have? What kind of educational institutions do we have? Are they doing well? Are they doing badly? What is the status of all this kind of infrastructure? Okay? Community assets and urban DNA. Urban DNA. You got to be able to marry the kind of cultural ecology to buildings, spaces, public spaces, and streets, neighborhoods, etc. So the planning and the cultural elements need to go together from the beginning, not at the end of the process. So I think we have already discussed this. And okay, the process. So when I do cultural planning, in my view, I start off with a survey or analysis of the local cultural ecology. And this includes the arts, but not just the arts. It includes the place, the landscapes, the institutions, the educational things, the skills, and so on. And then we analyze that particular survey, and then we plan. And then we do things. Only at the end of this process. So you see these three things. Only at the end of that, we come up with a policy with ideas of how this place should be transformed. So when I am advising policymakers, and especially mayors, I like that. And I say, first thing you should do is become an ethnographer and do a little bit more of, deep hanging out with your people, which means spending a hell of a lot of time in cafes, restaurants, public spaces, and listening to people, markets, etc., etc., listening to people, listening to what they say, what they express, what their views are, what their visions are. So do a little bit more of deep hanging out. I love deep hanging out in cities, personally, and I get a lot out of it, a lot of information out of it. Because it's strange, but people who are tasked with doing big policies or something, they stay in their office and they talk only to people like them. They don't go out a lot. So then you identify a place distinctive character, we said that, and then also put in place some kind of creative mechanisms for combining expert thinking, for example, architects, urban designers, and planners, etc. Combine that kind of expertise with people who know nothing of that, but may know a lot about the city. So we call it the wisdom of crowds. I don't know if you know the book that came out about 5-6 years ago. And this particular book was called The Wisdom of Crowds, makes the point that very often when you are solving a problem, the solution to that problem is much more creative and much more sustainable and interesting if you put together teams of people who have no particular knowledge of a certain field with people who have a deep knowledge of that field. So the contamination between the two produces creativity and produces interesting solutions. So maybe we need to start doing a little bit more of that, of combining wisdom of crowds and expertise. Then, of course, there is the idea we have to start with the big project. And I say, no, you don't have to start with a big project. You have to start with a small project. And in fact, I often talk about doing urban acupuncture. It's almost, I don't know if you are familiar with the acupuncture thing. You just press a needle where the energy is. So you kind of activate that energy in that point, at that point in time, not 10 years down the line, and so on. Not by planning ahead. You just do small interventions that activate the existing energy, you support that energy, and then you leave it open. You leave it open. You don't know where that process is going to lead you, but you've got to be able to be resilient and be able to go with this adaptability and capacity to change. Now, not many politicians are able to do that, but many experts and many community groups, many people living in a city can do that. So hence the idea of marrying together the politicians, the policymakers, the experts, and the people who live in a place. And then also we need to start thinking of delivery mechanisms that are a little bit more transparent and a little bit more connected with the people's views and expectations. Now, all this I call cultural planning. Now, technically, like if you want the details of something, the first question is this, like, what is distinctive about this place? I don't want to hear the story that everybody tells me about that place. We want to hear the stories we don't read in the press or something. We want to kind of unveil the layers of identity of a place. So we say, what is distinctive about this place? What is that beyond what is already known, of course? What are the distinctive resources of this place? For example, if there is an empty building bang in the town center that needs redevelopment, that is not a problem. It's a resource, potentially. It only needs to be put through something that is a little bit more, as we said, cultural planish. And the question is also, are there resources we didn't know we had, for example, in terms of cultural resources, but it could be also skills, capabilities, business opportunities or something. So it's a broader cultural spectrum that we are looking at here. And then also what policies and schemes are already there, because we don't want to duplicate things, so we want to be aware what is already there. And also how can we ensure these initiatives are joined and that we don't do 3 policies on the same building, or I don't know, different policies on